of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. One every two. I was taught when I was a child that the lungs of the world were the Amazon, and that the oxygen comes from plants, from trees, right? But the truth is now, it's scientifically proved that half of our breath, one of every two, comes from the ocean. So the first way to keep it clean, the ocean, 1 truck per minute gets dumped to the ocean worldwide as well. So it's like throwing toxic gases to the atmosphere, and we breathe that. In this case, we're throwing garbage to the ocean that gives us back oxygen. So the first reason to keep it clean is to breathe. It's something so simple as breathing. The other thing is that 25% of the protein worldwide comes from the oceans. I respect vegetarians, but there's plenty of people that they are not vegetarians. And if we are eating the protein from the ocean, we're eating plastic. And in plenty books, you read that by 2050 there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. So the second reason to do it is it's a matter of surviving. It's not we are a tree hugger. It's a reasonable thing. It's a survival thing, to have our beautiful oceans clean. And the other thing is that to produce this plastic, we consume 20% of the fossil fuels worldwide. So, and that's climate change, that's climate heating. So we have a thing regarding air, a thing regarding food, and a thing regarding climate change to be discussed in this. I know you have it clear, but I wanted to share my whys, that it's a strongness that you take out from you when you want to really keep fighting on this. The second part of my intervention is that I want to share with you how many things Ecuador has accomplished in the last years to fight plastic contamination. Nothing against plastic contamination. Ecuador has a circular economy law, okay, that is everything regarding to break the lineal economy, the lineal economy into a circular economy. We have a national law for that. As well, we have a single-use prohibition and regulation plastic law. Single-use plastic law we have in Ecuador. We were the first country in Latin America. We have a specific law that prohibits to import plastic garbage. We can't import it as a country. There have to be some specific things that we're missing, for example, raw material to produce plastic, and then there is an exemption we can import. We have plenty local laws in subnational states, subnational ordinances, that they prohibit single-use plastic as well. We have a redeemable tax for PET plastic bottles. So every plastic bottle is worth 2 cents in the street. If you see it in the street, you pick it up, you go to a place, and they give you 2 cents, okay? So we have that redeemable tax. We have Galapagos, a program that is zero waste Galapagos. We do all the effort. Why do I share this with you? We have done, 7 or 8 legal frames in order to stop contamination. And you all know Galapagos. Probably some of you have visited. The theory of Charles Darwin, 80% of our species are endemic. The first natural world heritage declared by UNESCO. And even though all those legal frames that we have been enforcing, 83% of the plastic we picked from our Galapagos coast comes from other continents. 83% of the plastic we pick in the Galapagos coast come from other continents. 16% of the plastic we pick in Galapagos at the coast come from Ecuador continental. And only 1% it is plastic or waste that it was produced in Galapagos. So it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how many effort we do, how many enforcement, punish, jail, fines. We will keep receiving garbage from other parts of the world, from other continents. So we have in Ecuador is a living example of doing a lot of effort, and besides that, or even though that, we're receiving this contamination. So we have local problems that only with global solutions we can find the solution of that. So, as you said, Ecuador, and I'm starting to finish, Ecuador was part of the Bureau with Ghana, Vietnam, Germany, that we convened 144 environmental ministers in Geneva. And it came out of that, and after in Kenya, the plastic treaty. And we have created a bureau that Ecuador is part, and it's willing to chair, because we think that we have the experience and the willing to leader this and to chair this. But what I'm trying to say everywhere is that that treaty, that it was in UNEA, that we have 24 months to accomplish it in a binding treaty worldwide, is that I encourage all the countries not to wait for the treaty. Ecuador didn't wait for all these legal frames. We can share good experience, bad experience. These are good experiences, but we have some implemented bad experiences that we would love to share with you in what we failed, and probably you have some good things. So let's not wait for the worldwide or the global plastic treaty, and let's start implementing one by one subnational cities, national statements in order to change this path and be able to eat food, safe food, clean air, and reduce climate change. So I wanted to share something from Ecuador, not academic or rhetoric. This is what we have lived, and that's our experience that we would love to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was so inspiring, and I appreciate the parallels between what we're trying to do around climate change here in terms of starting with subnational action and building towards implementation of a global agreement. Thank you, and appreciate you making time on a busy schedule. I know you're flying out today, so I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Arthi Ananthanarayanan, and I'm the director of the Climate and Plastics Initiative here at Ocean Conservancy. Just a little audience poll to start. How many of you thought about the oil use or the emissions from your flight over here? Maybe a little bit of guilt about that. How many of you thought about the oil use or the emissions from the plastic packaging that was on your airline meal? Okay, this is a pretty good audience. Now, the reason why I asked that is because the amount of oil that we use for the production of plastics worldwide is the same as what we use for the global aviation industry. The same, 6 to 8% worldwide, and it's the fastest growing source of demand for oil. It is, by 2050, we'll use more oil to produce plastics than we do to power our cars, and it will be 20% of global oil demand. Now let that sink in. We have to deal with plastics as part of the energy transition. That's 1/5 of our global oil demand. And this is a problem because plastics are made from and powered by fossil fuels, and they're sharing the same coastal energy infrastructure, refining, oil and gas production infrastructure that is having devastating effects on communities, that is creating huge greenhouse gas emissions, and now that it's facing great resilience challenges as those same communities are being battered by extreme weather with hurricanes, with climate change. And so it's important to us also as we think about this to understand that it's the same companies that have been resisting the clean energy transition that are funding this growth in fossil fuels and petrochemicals, right? They are seeing that demand drop from the transportation and power sectors, and they're plowing really deep pockets of money into growing petrochemical production. So the question that we need to think about here, right, this is a fossil fuel lock-in problem, this is a climate justice problem, this is a problem of coastal adaptation, right? They are seeing that demand drop, bring these all together, how can we actually deal with that? And I would start with, really good new pockets of money, we actually can address all of these goals, cutting emissions, reducing demand for fuels, mitigating the impacts on communities, and stemming the flow of plastics to the ocean by making and using less virgin plastic. Full stop. We have to do that. That has to be part of the energy transition. And, we're here at COP discussing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We're about to go in just 2 weeks into the first round of negotiations around a global plastics treaty. We have a moment right now as we have these two negotiations happening right next to each other to think about how these two agreements can complement each other and reinforce each other. And as we do that, we need to think about how we include plastics as part of climate commitments. How is that a meaningful part of the pledges that countries are making, companies, investors? And then how do we have transparency and accountability along the impacts all along the supply chain, right? That means emissions, that means the impacts on communities, that means the impacts at the end of life around the waste and incineration. And we need to dramatically scale up investment in the circular economy. So I'm so pleased to have with me today 3 panelists who are experts on this topic. By way of introduction, to my left I have Ms. Sharon Levine, who I'm so delighted to have joined us here today. Ms. Levine is a special education who turned into an environmental justice advocate, the founder of Rise St. James, which is a faith-based, Black-led community organization who's working so far successfully to stop the construction of a massive plastics complex in her community. She mobilized grassroots opposition to the project, educated community members, and peacefully protested to stop the construction of the facility, which would have been one of the largest new sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the US if it was constructed. Not to mention the additional air and water pollution in an area that's already dealing with an undue burden. On the end here we have Ms. Cristina Rodriguez. She is the Director of Climate Adaptation and Desertification at the Ministry of Environment for the Government of Peru. She has extensive professional experience in the formulation and evaluation of public investment projects and the implementations of policies for disaster risk management, as well as adaptation to climate change. Peru is one of the leading countries in advancing an ambitious agenda around the global instrument to end plastic pollution. And finally, in the middle here, we have Ms. Madeline Rose, who leads Pacific Environment's climate campaigns after a decade of advocacy in the humanitarian and peace-building sector. Pacific Environment recently led a study looking at decarbonization opportunities for the plastic sector in China. So she'll talk a little bit about those opportunities today. So I guess to start out, I'd love to hear just a little bit about why this connection between plastics and climate is so important in the places where you work. And I'll go to Ms. Levine first.
Well, the production of plastics is causing a lot of deaths where I'm from, because a lot of the chemicals that used to make the plastics are cancer causing. And in my community, we already have industries that's dealing with methane and other chemicals. And so we didn't need another industry to come into St. James Parish or County to pollute us even more. And the industry that was trying to be built into St. James was Formosa Plastics, a $9.4 billion industry. And that would cause death in my community because we already bombarded with 12 within a 10-mile radius, and that plant would be within that 10 miles. And if it would be built, it would have 14 plants inside of the complex. and that would not be sustainable for us to live. We are already 50% over the national average in cancer risk in the United States. And in 2018, we were the top of the line with cancer, breast cancer in our community, the highest in the state in 2018. So when I grew up, we didn't have all of this plastics, and we weren't sick. Now we have too many plants that's in our area, and just about everybody, almost everybody in my community is sick or have some type of medical problem. So the production of all of this plastic, we don't need all of this plastics. We can go back to the way when I was younger and we lived without plastics and we didn't have all of these health issues. So we need to cut down on plastics and find a way that we can live without using all of these plastics, especially the throwaway plastics. Because the plant that was going to come in, it was going to make throwaway plastics like straws, the plastic plates, the stuff with the styrofoams. And we already have a plant in my community that makes styrofoams. So this plant would come on top of that and destroy the whole neighborhood. So we don't need so much plastics.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I would. I think our story is quite similar. So again, I'm Madeline Rose, and I'm sorry that I'm here speaking. Unfortunately, my colleague Shuijing Chen from China is really the expert, but couldn't be here today. So we support grassroots communities around the Pacific Rim with a focus on the U.S. West Coast, Arctic communities, and in China. And China and Vietnam. And so very similarly, we are working on sort of that intersection of where fossil fuel interests and coastal communities intersect, which is often in these highly industrial port communities, right? You have so much industry coming in and out of ports. And we started to see, and more of our partners were sort of raising that new petrochemical facilities, new plastics facilities were coming online. And that's sort of how we came to the issue. And I think for us, we really realized, again, through our partners in these coastal communities, that this was becoming a lifeline industry for oil and gas, right? Just like Arthi said, that the oil and gas industry sees plastics as a survival pathway. They want to just push as much plastic on all of us as they can, as they're getting pushed out of cars, as they're getting pushed out of trucks, as they're getting pushed out of other industries, as the movement is winning on other industries, they're finding ways to survive. And they, you read an Exxon report, they say, plastics is a way for us to stay alive until 2100. So, we're supporting grassroots communities, again, in Vietnam and China and a few other places around the Pacific to fight back and to support the plastics treaty. So, yeah, that's how we came to the issue.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. First, I would like to thank for the invitation to be in this panel. I would like to highlight that for Peru, the government of Peru, plastic is a priority environmental policy. We fight against pollution by plastic and plastic waste and microplastic in the environment, as well as the transition toward a circular economy of plastic. At the same time, and actually both law, climate change and also the regulation of plastic was approved the same year, 2018. So we have like both regulation in the same place because climate change is also a priority for us, and we have very strong commitments to reach our NDCs. So if we see our NDCs, actually, we don't have one related to plastic specifically, right? Because, it's not now in the discussion of our NDC, and that's, I think, one of the reasons I also came and we accept this invitation to learn a little bit more from the panelists, from the audience, these connections, and then we're totally open to learn and see if in the future we can improve our ambition of NDCs also considering plastic. So both things are important in the country, and we're happy here to learn more the connection between them.
That's great. If I can ask Christina a question to you to start. I had mentioned before that Peru is taking a lead role in advancing the ambition around the Global Plastics Instrument, taking a full life cycle approach, dealing with pollution from source to sea. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your priorities as the negotiations get underway this month.
Yes, this month at the end of this month we're gonna attend to the committee where it's taking place in Uruguay, and we hope that in this committee our regions continues the leadership of this issue, and we really hope that the world we achieve a solid and ambitious and also realistic treaty to enhance the reduction of pollution by plastic in the world. So one of our priorities also, or our expectation, is to move the agenda and have more definitions on the committees and the elements for the instrument that we want to use. And also we want to get a consensus about the governance and the function of the committee. I would like to highlight other points that we can discuss in that sessions. The incorporation of circular economy approach in plastic. Also this, the development of national action plans according to the national circumstances and capacity to work on the prevention, reduction, and elimination of plastic production. In this way, we expect that during this meeting, there will be a broad dialogue on priorities, needs, challenges, and barriers that we're facing, and also discuss all the technical assistance and financial support that the countries can get. So, as I say, we want to keep the leadership in this matter, and hopefully we can move the agenda too.
That's really helpful, and it reminds me of some of the conversations that are happening right now around financing and technical assistance and national action plans. Madeline, you come to this issue from the climate space. I'm curious, as you think about the Paris Agreement and the Global Plastics Treaty, what are some of the things we can learn from our experience with the Paris Agreement and trying to implement the treaty?
Thanks, Arthi. So fortunately, I heard Luciana Tabiana was asked this question a few days ago, and I heard her answer, so I can sort of steal some of that. But so I think three main points that we're thinking about. The first, the fundamental principle of the Paris Agreement was common but differentiated responsibility, but they didn't agree on what was differentiated when they finished Paris, right? So there was never a quantitative breakdown of who was going to define what differentiation means. In the plastics treaty negotiation framework so far, even though it's just getting started, there already is consensus that polluters will pay. That is really good. That's a learning from Paris, and that needs to stay. We also think that holding the line on polluters pay in the plastics treaty will be somewhat easier because the plastics polluters are the oil and gas companies, right? Whereas climate, you have transportation, you have energy, there's so many GHG emitters. If we really just keep focused on the big producers of plastics, which is a relatively smaller ecosystem of players, then we can force them to pay when the plastics treaty is done. So yeah, don't drop polluter pays. The second, I think, reflection is we can't accept only long-range goals, right? The Paris Agreement, again, because it was the first of its kind, it was so focused on just like getting governments to agree to 2050 and this long-range idea of energy transition that we never really locked in mechanisms for short-term wins. Climate change is going faster than us. Like, we aren't winning. We are not at 1.5 aligned as a world, and Paris was 6 years ago. So if plastics is going to go faster and do better, we have to have short-term targets. So, like, what about next year, 2025, 2028, 2030? We can't only let negotiators agree on long-range goals. And then the third, it's a really big priority for our folks in China and Vietnam, is to mandate transparency of the whole plastic value chain. Again, I think with GHGs, we've spent 6 years just getting the data right and getting the numbers right. And so if the treaty can really make sure to, from the outset, mandate transparency, so again, we don't lose those 6 years and just get working right immediately.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Sharon, I'm wondering if you can comment on, this has been a COP where we've talked a lot about climate justice. There is a climate justice pavilion for the first time, which has had some amazing, amazing presentations. And we've talked a lot about the role of frontline defenders in helping us address some of the hardest challenges of the climate crisis, actually stopping some of the growth of these pipelines, oil and gas production, and petrochemical facilities. I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about, what are some of the things that industry is doing to try to neutralize that resistance in your community? What are some of the policies that we need to protect those frontline defenders as we work to address the problem of plastic pollution and climate change?
Well, we need to have more laws that would protect the frontline leaders. In Louisiana, we had an amendment that they were trying to pass where they would shut the mouths of the protesters and just stop us from speaking, shut us down. And we protested against that amendment, and it did not pass. They wanted to silence us, but we won on that. So that's why we can go out there and protest and protect what's ours and speak against industry that's trying to destroy us. And plus, on top of industry trying to destroy us, we have hurricanes and storms in our area. So it's like a double whammy. So we need to find more laws that will protect the frontline leaders and protect us from industry that's polluting us, protect us from all these hurricanes, because it is climate change. Climate change is real. And we need to find strategies that we can bring to the table to our public officials where they would join with us to help us with these fights and find laws that will protect us, the people, from all of these devastations. Thank you.
That's really helpful. I mean, so many of the themes that we've heard talked about today around transparency and accountability for those climate impacts in the places where they're happening. Let's talk a little bit about, what does decarbonization, it's Decarbonization Day, what does decarbonization look like for the plastic sector? Madeline, you've been looking at this. Pacific Environment conducted a study, conducted some research in China. I'd be curious, what did you learn from that about what are the strategies needed to decarbonize the sector?
Yeah, so again, our team conducted some research last year looking into the emissions of plastics in China and just trying to figure out, what did the landscape look like? Essentially, we found that if we don't take action now, carbon emissions from plastics in China will increase linearly to 1.4 billion tons by 2060 in a business as usual scenario. There's a lot of petrochemical facilities planned to come online. So it's a huge issue that's going up. We also just happened to be doing this research during COVID. And as we all know, COVID facilitated a transformation that we still don't understand as a society in e-commerce. You had millions and millions and millions of people sitting at home buying things on Amazon without really fully understanding the consequence of what that means for the supply chain, what that means for manufacturing as we know it. So we think plastics went up significantly globally, probably, but certainly we were able to document that in China with the e-commerce revolution we're now seeing. So essentially, it's bad, it's going up, we got to get ahead of this and start advocating for reduction. So essentially our team is advocating to completely phase out all single-use plastics. to also curb durable plastic production, and pursue an end state of zero waste. So we're advocating for 4 sort of solutions for decarbonization in the short term. So first and foremost, reduction. Reduce the amount that we're producing, reduce the demand, reduce how much we're making. The second is sort of plastic substitution. So that's sort of in the durable space, in the medical space, right? With climate change getting worse, there are still going to be pandemics. We're still going to need, the medical industry is still maybe going to have some plastics, but can we increase the durability and the reusability so that it's not single use? The third is around reuse, refill. So again, where can we change the way we grocery shop, the way that we buy boba tea? Like, how can we innovate around reuse, refill, again, to curb that demand for single use? And then fourth, advocating for smarter recycling and end-of-life approaches. So yeah, happy to go into the weeds of any of that, but that's sort of our top line finding. And I guess the last thing I would add to that, sort of cross-cutting, but that obviously this group knows, incineration is very bad. So when you incinerate plastics as well, that increases their life cycle GHG emissions by about 30%. So if you can also if we can reduce, while we're trying to phase out all single-use plastics by 2040, if we can also basically immediately end incineration, that's going to save us in the short term on GHG emissions.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And while we're talking about policies, I just want to call out the dinosaur in the room, Freddie the dinosaur, who is here to raise awareness about fossil fuel subsidies. I think one connection that people don't make very often is that fossil fuel subsidies also contribute to this problem of cheap, unmanageable plastics. 60 to 70% of the cost of plastics is fossil fuel inputs. And so when we have subsidies that are taking away money from climate mitigation, from schools, from the infrastructure that we need, we're also contributing to our plastics problem. So thank you, Freddie, for joining us today. Great. Well, we've talked a lot about some of the strategies. I also wanted to highlight, just in thinking about what are the different decarbonization pathways. In some of the other studies that I've seen, when people look at the costs of decarbonizing the plastic sector, moving towards a circular economy, reducing unnecessary plastics, and reusing plastics wherever possible is also one of the cheapest ways for us to decarbonize the sector. So as we prioritize our funding around mitigation, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Christina, you mentioned, sort of coming here, thinking about sort of how do plastics fit into NDCs, and I think that's an important piece for the group here today to think about. I'd love to hear your sort of experience in thinking about that for Peru, and you also, I know, had worked on a technical assistance project to think about how Latin American countries can start to incorporate circular economy into their NDCs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, during this year, I think it was very fast, actually. We came together with 5 Latin American countries: Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. And we together, I was very impressed how fast we built a concept note and get agree what we want in this matter. And we request a multi-country technical assistance to the Climate Technological Center and Network, CTCN, where I'm focal point. And we asked for technical assistance to prepare guidelines for monitoring and evaluating impacts of circular economy measures on national climate targets. So with this initiative, we're gonna have information related to data and good collection practices. We want to identify good also monitoring indicators and their contributions to the climate goals of each country in the way that it is possible to note the contribution of the circular economy in the reduction of emissions. So this project is not starting yet. Probably we expect it to start in the probably March next year. But it was, for me, was impressive how fast we came together to build that. So it means that there is really an interest and commitments in all these probably more countries. Ecuador is not here, but in the list, probably we show that our interest is to work in this issue. And also we already in our NDCs in mitigation, especially, we always promote a circular economy approach. Even though we don't have a law in that area, we don't have a law. We actually, one of the challenge, we thinking how to strengthen the institutionality in circular economy. But we see a lot of opportunities in NDCs, because if right now we have 63 mitigation measures, and some of them are related to energy, agriculture, also in industry. So of course there you can do both, reduce emissions and also apply circular economy process actions. So we think that there will be a good synergy, but we need to understand better the technical part that circular economy needs, like monitoring, how reporting, how to follow all these actions and their contribution to our NDC. So I think that there is a lot of synergy there, and we also, even though this is a topic that in our Ministry of Environment is related to two different vice ministers and different offices, but in this issue we always are like coordinating to see how we can do things together. So I think it's a good sign also that these two topics can move forward and in the future have better information in the relation of both circular economy and mitigation.
That's really helpful. And I hope it's okay if I share, when we started talking about this panel with Christina, even getting sort of the information to talk about climate or plastics, it was sort of always different people within the same ministry who are dealing with these issues. And so, this is kind of a classic question of intersectionality and thinking about how can we link these two issues that are deeply intertwined when, it's usually housed in different places. So I know we're getting to the end of our Friday. Other than Freddie the dinosaur here today, I'm wondering if I can ask each of our panelists if there's one thing that you want folks here to take from this conversation, what would you want them to remember?
I would want them to remember that we need to find a way to break away from all of these plastics and go back to the way it was when we were younger. And that would save more lives to a certain extent. And we'll be able to breathe cleaner air and drink clean water and go back to planting a garden again. That's what I would like to see.
Very similar to Sharon, I would say my takeaway, and who knows, I'm not a comms. Comms isn't my job, but I think I'm good at it sometimes. I think our headline should be like, plastic is an oil product. Like billboards all over, just like tell people that plastic is an oil product. Most people don't know that, and like I don't know if I knew that before I took this job. So we need to tell people and make sure everyone realizes that plastic is an oil product and it's sick. It's poisoning us. Like we shouldn't just have plastic bottles in your house. You shouldn't just have plastic things everywhere and you shouldn't have plastics in your clothes and not think of it. It's poisoning us. It's poisoning people. It's killing people. It's giving people cancer. It's an oil product, and I think if we can get out the word that plastic is a fossil fuel challenge, we can start to mobilize more momentum on it.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation again. I think I learned a lot from the panelists. All this research and numbers and experience that we have is good. I think I'm more prepared now to discuss with my colleagues in the other area that deal with plastic and environmental management in general, to come together both topics, our NDCs and this circular economy, and also the plastic regulation. So I think this is very useful for the work I do and my office run. And also, I remember that when we trying to evaluate the invitation and see the responses, then we actually start like, yeah, this is also important because in terms of adaptation, plastic pollution will basically increase vulnerability in everywhere, you know, ecosystem, ocean, territorial ecosystem, population. So it's a variable that at the end will increase the risk that we're trying to reduce with adaptation to climate change. So it's also make us like reflection in this matter. So thank you for that.
That's right. It is so important for coastal resilience and adaptation. And I'll just add, I think right now there's a lot of messaging around the inevitability of plastics and the growth of plastics. But kind of going to Sharon, what you were saying, more than half the plastics ever made were made in the last, I think, 17, 18 years, right? That's not a long time for the amount of change we've seen and the amount of plastics in our lives. I remember going to India when I was a kid, and a family gathering of 40 people would lead to like a tiny, tiny bucket of scraps after a whole day. It's not that far that we actually have to look for solutions, and I would encourage us, as we are doing with climate change, to look at the whole range of solutions, looking to the Global South for some of those solutions, looking to the communities that are impacted for some of those solutions, and thinking about the intersection of these two things, which really can contribute to the kind of future we want to see. So it's a Friday. I'm going to give you a few minutes back, but I invite you to hang out if you want to talk to some of our panelists. They are truly inspiring women.